All right, all right, all right. Welcome in. This is Toilets to Titles, and this is a special bonus episode. We are doing this off season. We are going to be breaking down as many teams as possible, their off seasons. And this year, actually this evening, we're doing Dallas Cowboys, and we are joined once again this year by Kyle Youmans of DallasCowboys.com. It's at Kyle_YOUMANS on the Twitter. Kyle, what's happening?
Nothing much. It's funny. I'm already counting down the days to Oxnard, California, getting back to training camp. And I've actually been really excited to do this show. One, because you both are my guys. I love doing shows with you guys. But secondly, because I haven't recorded a show in like a week. I mean, it's the dead of the off season. There's nothing going on right now. But it's also exciting because that means we're getting closer and closer to things really mattering. So I'm excited to do this with you.
Man, so for me, a person who listens to you, so you're on the draft show, which is huge. This year, it was huge, but last year it was even more so, just because we were out of it a lot quicker. This year there was still hope, so we didn't get into the draft show as quickly, as we did the year before. But still, this was a pivotal draft, and we're going to get into that. But we needed some attitude, we needed some thumpers, because the way that we got beat up by the Broncos, and then the way we got beat up by the 49ers, that just laid a blueprint. But like you said, you guys haven't recorded in a week. For me, I don't even like to listen to music. I like to just listen to podcasts. So especially Dallas, I live in New York, so I can't put on New York radio because it's so, I just can't, so I just listen to, I got the Dallas Cowboys app. I'm listening to your stuff. And also, it's the last episode that I listened to was the one when Hellman said goodbye. So, now we're leaving on I need something else to pick me back up. So I can't wait till camp comes around, because the storylines are a lot of fun. We don't have HBO watching us this year. But no
HBO. But you're talking about New York. Think about what Andrew has to deal with from Australia. Yeah. He can't listen to anything. They're talking about the rugby, and they're talking about cricket. Like, what? It doesn't matter. They're not talking about football down under
and netball. Right, Andrew?
Netball, yeah.
Netball is a game. That's sorry, I didn't introduce my other man. I got Andrew Campey at Andrew Campey. He's the mastermind behind toiletstotitles.com. If you've checked out the website, that's all his work, all of our graphics, all his work. And he's also the resident Dallas Cowboys fan. So, Andrew, how you feeling this evening, man?
Well, yeah, this evening for you. It's 10:40 for me in the morning. So it's always really kind of strange when I talk to you guys, because you're always going, like, quite often you're all like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to have a beer and go to bed. And I'm thinking, nah, it's probably too early for a beer for me. But it's really kind of funny, because I always tell the story that the reason I started following the Cowboys was because back in the day, all we got was the Super Bowl on like one of our cheap sort of free-to-air channels. And so I started sort of following the Cowboys from that. And then it's amazing how you think over time, like how it sort of expanded, where you could get the internet, so you could go and you could read some stuff about the team, to then all of a sudden it was podcasts, you can listen. And now it's like you've got footage at the training camp, you've got like all the draft shows, all this kind of stuff. Like, it's amazing to think like where we've come in, even like the last sort of 15 years, as far as being able to get that information you want. It's just kind of amazing, really, for someone like me who can be sitting miles away and just get that stuff pretty much as fast as everyone else. Is great, I reckon.
I'm not going to lie to you, though. I kind of wish they were still showing Super Bowls with the Cowboys down in Australia, too. I think that would be awesome as well. I'm sure all this extra content is great, but they need to make a Super Bowl, because, I haven't been alive on this earth enough to see them in one. So, they need to get back to that point. But, hey, at least you've got the content to keep up with, for sure.
Well, I can tell you this. So, Kyle, you focus on the draft during the draft show. Andrew, he was my ticket. The reason he was my ticket is because they're a day ahead in Australia. So I already knew who the Cowboys were picking, before everybody else did. So you got to get yourself a friend from Australia, man, because they're ahead of us.
I'll get you my number when we're done with this, Andrew. We'll talk. We'll figure this. We'll WhatsApp it or whatever they use to kind of text back and forth. We'll figure this out.
Yeah. Well, you guys do such a good job that, I knew, going into the draft, like I heard Tyler Smith, I want to say like 8 a.m. that morning. And then I already knew Sam Williams, because, seeing the pictures of Dan Quinn working him out at Ole Miss. And all right, so we're going to get into all that. But let's take a look in the past, just a little bit. It kind of feels like forever ago, because of all the content that's come out since the season. But what are your thoughts on the past season? How we started, where you thought we'd be, and how we ended up.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was that there were certainly expectations going into it. Of course, with Dak Prescott returning, a high-flying offense, a healthy offensive line, all throughout training camp, there were high expectations, and I think through the first 6-7 weeks of the season, those expectations were certainly met. I mean, 6-1 going into the bye week, you had beaten the Patriots in Week 7 in that overtime win that ultimately was where Dak Prescott strained his calf, and that provided a little bit of a hurdle in the middle of the season. But I think the final expectation met was, I mean, win the division and get to the playoffs. They did that on both occasions, but you also felt like it was a missed opportunity. And that's the words that keep rattling in my head all offseason long, is you missed an opportunity. You were healthy going into the playoffs. You had plenty of momentum on both sides of the football. You were the highest scoring team in the NFL. You were the highest takeaway team in the NFL. One of only 3 teams, I believe, in NFL history to lead the NFL in points per game, yards per game, and takeaways over the course of the season. And the previous 2 both won the Super Bowl, including the 1971 Dallas Cowboys. So the fact that you didn't make a run in the playoffs, even just winning a game in the playoffs, I think would have made this feel a little bit more like a successful season. But in the end, there was nothing but disappointment, getting bounced at home in front of a ruckus crowd and a wild card weekend where, yeah, things didn't necessarily go your way at the beginning, but you fought back, you came up short. But ultimately, as the slow starts that bit them early on, and they weren't able to turn around. But I think there's a higher expectation this year, even with maybe a step back on paper talent-wise. There's a higher expectation. This team wants to win playoff games, and that's what ultimately what the goal is heading into 2022.
Well, Kellen Moore was one of the hottest names the first half of the season. That cooled off. But if you would have said last year during the first 6 weeks of the season that we would keep McCarthy and Moore, people would have not believed you. And then towards the end of the season, Dan Quinn is a huge name. We keep him as well. So the fact that we were able to hold on to both of those guys and give Kellen Moore one more shot, because, things did look awesome to start the season. Zeke's banged up, then Dak gets banged up, and things completely shifted. Now, it's hard to say necessarily what the huge problem was with this team, but a big problem was when we got punched in the mouth, we didn't respond very well. And, that's got to change. When I played football, I played on the defensive side of football. When I coached on the defensive side of football. Like, I love defensive football. So it's fun watching, 40-30, but I would much rather watch 20-10. So seeing the progression of Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs, seeing that and then seeing even Vander Esch, even though we brought him back for one season, that last game of the year was his best, and we got Jabril Cox, who, not to brag about injuring somebody, but that the way he screamed down that goal line and lit up Daniel Jones, like that was very impressive. And then Jaron Kearse, we haven't had a safety that made plays like that. And so there's a lot of guys on the defensive side of the ball who talk it and walk it. And that's something I'm looking forward to seeing.
No, I think you're onto something there specifically, because I think even with maybe a personnel step back, like I said, from a talent perspective on paper, the fact that you kept your coordinators is a huge deal. I mean, it's the first time you've had any kind of continuity in an offseason since prior to the COVID pandemic. I mean, you think about it, you change coaches right before COVID hits, then you change your defensive coordinator the year after COVID hits, and then you get right back into this with Dan Quinn and Kellen Moore. You're better this year than you were all the way back in 2018, 2019, when you were still changing guys and you weren't necessarily comfortable with your coaching staff. There's a lot of continuity and a lot of consistency that can be built with that. And it starts last year on the defensive side of the ball. You wanted the defense to be mediocre. Right. I mean, yeah, you didn't need they were bad in 2020.
Terrible.
You needed them to take a step up to mediocre. That's all you asked for. Not only did they do that, not only were they middle of the road, but they actually were good. They were a good defense. And honestly, I would argue right now the defense is the heart and soul of this franchise at this very moment, even with the investment that they've made on the offensive side of the football. That's where I think the majority of the pressure lies, because you went into 2021 expecting, hey, the offense is going to do their job. They're going to come out, they're going to smack people in the mouth, they're going to get off to these hot starts, and then all of a sudden we're off and rolling if our defense can make a couple of stops here and there. Defense gave you some stops, but like you said, those slow starts were something that the offense just could not figure out. The run game played a factor into that. Dak's health in the middle and the back half of the season played a factor into that. That needs to be fixed, and I think it really falls squarely on the shoulders of not only Dak Prescott, but Kellen Moore as well. I think that's a duo right now that has to figure that out heading into this season if they're going to be successful.
Man, and that coaching staff, it's a blessing getting them back. But now there's going to be some pressure because there's a coach who's sitting at home right now named Sean Payton, who, the stars are aligning. Like it seems like that could be coming down the pipe. I don't know if you're allowed to talk on that or what, but that's definitely something they're going to have to be, looking out towards.
Well, I mean, I've got my own opinion on that specifically, but I'm going to say it because I don't know anything more so than what you guys know in that regard. If anything, if they're doing something like that, they're keeping it as close to the chest as anybody. And honestly, I don't believe that they're doing anything like that straight up. I really don't. I think, especially whenever the news came out with, what was it, 4 years, $100 million is what it would take for Miami to get him there. It's like, oh, that's a lot of money. Like, and I don't necessarily think that this is a franchise that is looking forward to doing something like that. And they can't afford to let a year go to waste. I mean, the Jones family wants to win now. I can't necessarily explain that and the correlation with the offseason and the lack of moves. I mean, you go out and you get a James Washington, you go out and you re-sign a couple of guys on your defensive side of the football, but ultimately it was a quiet offseason. I can't necessarily explain that, but I don't think it's a Sean Payton move, nor do I think they're even thinking that far ahead in terms of the coaching staff. I think they're happy with what they have here. And if anything, I think the pressure's on inside the building. I mean, the way that Dan Quinn came on the scene last year and really turned that defense around like I just talked about, I think if anybody's putting pressure on Mike McCarthy to be a head coach, it would probably be Dan Quinn that's sitting in the office down the hall.
Man, but we had that similar scenario a few years ago. Who was the coach of the secondary in Seattle who became our defensive coordinator? And
Chris Richard?
Chris Richard. He like he was everybody's favorite coach. And then, so it'll be nice to see if Quinn, I'm hoping clearly, I believe. So I hope that he could put another stellar season together, because if that's the case, we're doing something very good and very strong and building on a strong performance from last year. All right, so let's look ahead to this season. I'm going to start with the draft. I'm going to start with this offensive line and some moves we made. We moved on from La'el Collins. It seemed like Mike McCarthy and the coaching staff, they weren't very fond of La'el Collins. He got in a little bit of trouble, missed some games, and then Terrence Steele, earned that job. Like he didn't have the capital La'el Collins had. Came up, secured the job, and he played very well, out the gate. So we got Terrence Steele. We don't have La'el. And then we go ahead and draft a road grader in Tyler Smith, a big boy with a big attitude. So how confident are you in the offensive line, and how do you feel about that move to bring in Tyler Smith?
I'm more confident in it this year than I was last year at this point. And a big reason for that is you don't bring back La'el Collins. You end up releasing him at the end of the season, but ultimately he wasn't the same La'el Collins. You can look at it on tape. He had his good reps, but for the majority of the time he was inconsistent. He didn't move as well, whether that was the hip injury and something sustaining from that. That's kind of what it looked like. Was he just never really made his way back the way that he was in 2019 when he was one of the top tackles, arguably, in the NFC. And you mentioned Terrence Steele. The fact that he stepped up and improved as much as he did from year one to year two was not only impressive on the field, but it was a testament to the way that he works off the field. And in talking with Coach McCarthy, talking with Joe Philbin, and I answered a mailbag on the website too about this the other day. You can go check that out on DallasCowboys.com. But in talking to both of those coaches, they do nothing but rave about his work ethic, about his growth, about the way that he hits the weight room. And that was a big conversation coming out of Texas Tech. His lower body wasn't strong enough. His footwork wasn't good enough. He was heavy when he moved. He labored. That's not the case anymore. He actually has the light feet. He has the heavy hands. And in speaking of those two things, that's exactly what Tyler Smith has as well. And so I think there's some excitement around the fact that not only are you revamping this offensive line, but you're doing it with youth. Terrence Steele's 24 years old and heading into his third year on the offensive line. He'll be 25 at some point throughout the season. Then you've got Tyler Smith, who's a young product. I mean, 21-year-old coming in as a guy who, if he would have stayed at the collegiate level, probably would be picked up by a top 5, not a power 5, by a top 5 program to play offensive tackle. He's a guy you can groom at guard and then maybe take over a tackle in a couple of years if Tyron Smith's career does come to an end. But you have this mixture of youth. You have this mixture of returning studs like a Zach Martin and a Tyron Smith. I would even throw Tyler Biotish into the youth as well. He had great, but he's a part of youth that they're expecting to take another step. And then you've also got some depth as well, which is something that this offensive line hasn't necessarily had in the past.
Yeah, I know we have the kid from North Dakota State, I believe.
North Dakota, I'm sorry.
And he was getting reps. Well, let's go. And then the cat we drafted from Marshall, or no, undrafted. So we have 2. But let's go. He's getting more reps than Ball, correct? Or that's how it looked in the camp a few weeks ago.
They both had they both had probably even reps. I think they were both working on both sides of the offensive line. Well, let's go. 5th round pick out of North Dakota was on the left side, and then 2021 5th round pick out of Marshall. You had that right initially. Josh Ball was on the right side. So you have 2 5th round picks. That's where you find your depth. That's where you find your developmental guys. Josh Ball didn't look as good as Waletzko did, but also Waletzko's got about a couple inches on Josh Ball. Waletzko's a 6'7" monster of a man, and he's moving pretty well for a guy that's his size and somebody that's coming out of the FCS ranks. Whereas Josh Ball, coming out of a group of 5 school, kind of had some off the field issues throughout the early parts of his career that got him dismissed from Florida State. He's still a guy that's growing and is having some troubles at the moment, but they expect those guys to contribute if called upon. And I think right now it's a battle for that swing tackle spot if the tackle spot isn't already given to a Tyler Smith that's playing up on that offensive line at the guard spot.
I mean, we know when they let go of Lael, post June 1st, that freed up a decent amount of cap space. So, I don't see them putting it into the offensive line, but there's JC Treader's out there from Cleveland, but I've heard mixed things about him, and I'm sure you're probably sick of hearing that name. But there are players available, but they got the money. I'm very interested to see where they go with the money. But let's speak of somebody who got the money, and that's Dak Prescott. All right, so Dak Prescott, he comes back last year, lights out to start the season, hurts his calf. And down the stretch, it was pretty up and down. And what do you think? Which Dak do you think that we see this year? I know Cooper's gone, but he's got CeeDee Lamb. But another thing, Cedric Wilson's gone. That it seemed like Cedric Wilson was a big safety blanket for him. And I know we're going to talk about Tolbert in a little bit, but I think Tolbert is going to benefit from being the 3rd or 4th option because now Schultz is going to move up to number 2. Lamb's up there at number 1, and Dak tends to hit the 3, 4, 5 guy. So that'll be interesting. But which Dak do you think we see this season?
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point about Cedric Wilson. That's an underrated loss this offseason. I think if you had to put him up at the top of the list, I couldn't necessarily argue it because of what he brought from a special team standpoint, what he brought from an offensive standpoint. It was really under the radar, but still very much so productive. I really think you're going to get it's tough for me to say he's going to be a first half of 2021 Dak Prescott where he's an MVP candidate and he's slinging it around and throwing for 6 touchdowns a game or whatever. I mean, I know that's an exaggeration, but he was dealing through the first 7 weeks this past season. It's hard for me to really put him in that category, but I don't think he'll be that far off. I mean, he looks leaner. He looks quick. I mean, the throwing motion that he had last year coming out of training camp wasn't necessarily there. I remember I got killed on it on Twitter following the week 1 loss to the Buccaneers. He threw for like 402 yards, but the ball was dying off at the end of his throws, and he didn't necessarily push it downfield. 95% of his completions were inside the 15-yard mark, and everything was kind of underneath. Well, when a team figured that out, he was finally able to get healthy from the shoulder injury he had in training camp, and he was able to push it downfield.
I forgot about that.
Prior to the calf injury. And then the calf injury really, I think, really cemented the fact that he was going to be pushing through it throughout the season and wasn't necessarily the same. I think he will be back to normal this year in that regard. I think he'll play really well in the early parts of the season. He's got to continue to finish that and to adapt with defenses, because you mentioned Denver right at the start of this interview. They provided a blueprint, as cheesy as that sounds and how overused that term is. That's what it was. They came out, they played that too high look, and it was too much for Dak to combat against. And I think that's something that defenses took note on, and they didn't necessarily adjust from an offensive standpoint throughout the season. That's what Dak's going to have to do. He's going to have to provide some consistency, and he's going to have to find a way to adjust along the way in order to continue to be successful.
Man, like obviously you want to score as many points as you can, right? But 28 points a game, like that's good enough. Like it's going to be about sustaining drives, long drives, because now, he doesn't have to do, this isn't the Romo years. No. We're starting to develop a defense. You don't have to carry us. You just, Zeke needs to step up, and hopefully he's healthy this year. So this is going to lead me into the next thing. I follow.
Let me just
go ahead. Have your Dak talk.
Have
your Dak talk.
Oh, no, you've mentioned Romo, and to me, the thing that I always say about Romo was he was really good at getting that third or fourth wide receiver who was a nobody, and getting them involved. And
Laurent Robinson.
Yeah, we're going to find that this year with, I reckon, Mahomes and Dak are both going into a similar situation where we're going to have to see how they go about spreading the ball around and actually making players out of these third or fourth guys. So I think it's going to be good, because to a certain extent, it means that the defenses won't be able to actually understand where the ball's going, because it could be going anywhere. And I think to a certain extent, that was what happened with Schultz last year, was they weren't really expecting him to get the ball as much as he did. So it was a bit of a surprise for the defenses. And I think this year, when you take Cooper out of it, I think really the ball's going to have to be spread around. So I'm not particularly worried about the offense. I think the offense will be the offense, as it has been pretty much for years at the Cowboys. And I guess my biggest question is going to be on the defensive side, for the simple fact that, it doesn't really seem like we've had massive additions on the defense, but we're hoping that there's going to be the next step. And if the next step comes, then as you mentioned earlier, Kyle, then you've got to feel the defensive coordinator is either moving to a higher position at the Cowboys or moving higher elsewhere. So it's going to be interesting.
You want that to happen. Coach said it a moment ago. Like if you're talking about Dan Quinn being a head coach later in this offseason or later in this season, that's a great thing. That means your defense is playing lights out. They're playing their asses off, and you're playing really well all the way through. That's a good thing. But I just going back to what you said about the offense, Dak has done that to a certain extent. Think about the impact that Miles Turner had. Think about the impact that Cedric Wilson has had on the bottom half of this depth chart. I mean, there are guys that have played minimal snaps but made a marginal impact. And that's something that Dak Prescott, I think, picked up maybe from the way that Tony used to do it. Now, Tony did a little bit further down the depth chart. That's what Dak's going to have to do this year. He's going to have to step up, and guys like Jalen Tolbert, James Washington, even the backup tight ends, Sean McEwen, who's going into his third year. Think about Jake Ferguson as a rookie. They're going to have to contribute to a certain extent too, especially when Michael Gallup's not in the fold in the early parts of the season, because there's a good chance he's on the PUP list heading into week 5. I mean, he may miss the first 4 games of the season, depending on how quickly his rehab is wrapped up here in the next couple of months. So I think this is a huge year for Dak Prescott. And like you said, he's not alone. I mean, Patrick Mahomes going through the same thing. Aaron Rodgers is going through the same thing. They've lost their top targets. Now they have to adjust.
Man, Dak in the same sentence as Mahomes and Rodgers.
I mean, but it's not even just because of the talent level there, but it's because he's a high-end quarterback. He's a top-end quarterback, and then he lost a top 10 wide receiver, if we're really arguing, because Amari Cooper deserves to be up there in the top 10 guys in the NFL in terms of a receiver even with his production lacking these last couple of years, I still think he's one of those guys that you could put up into that conversation just based on talent alone.
Cooper is about as quarterback friendly as you can be. The windows he creates are rather large. So any quarterback will be happy to have Amari Cooper. And, I'm going to get into wide receivers in a little bit, but I feel like James Washington could be like the Jaron Kearse signing for our offense a year later, because Washington was a dude at Oklahoma State. His thing is getting vertical, getting on top of you, but you need so vertical routes, post routes, deep in breaking routes, and even on the comeback. And what couldn't Ben Roethlisberger do the last 3 years? Throw any of those routes. Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, just throw it up as high as you can. So I don't even know if James Washington has been able to play his best ball yet. So I'm not saying James Washington is a dude in the NFL, but I think he's probably better than what most people think. And hopefully Kellen Moore can do for him what Dan Quinn did for, Jaron Kearse, and give him a chance to showcase his ability.
I like what you said there. And honestly, it kind of brings up a point I meant to make. And I also said Miles Turner. I meant Malik Turner. Basketball, the NBA draft was yesterday. But the whole thing with Dak Prescott and finding these guys open is he doesn't throw to receivers that aren't open. You have to have some level of separation for Dak to even throw you the football. I mean, that's been the case over the course of his career. And yeah, he'll force it in some tight windows, but ultimately he wants to take care of the football. So he's going to throw it to you if you're open. James Washington, what was his best trait as a receiver in Pittsburgh? Getting open, separation, finding a way down the field, finding a way over the middle of the field, something that he tried to do quite a bit with Ben Roethlisberger, but even Roethlisberger at the back half of his career couldn't find him open. I agree with you. I think he could be an underrating signing. The big thing with it is I just haven't seen him on the field yet. I mean, nobody's seen him on the field yet. He's been out throughout the offseason. We'll get our first look at him really in training camp to see exactly what kind of shape he's in, exactly what kind of receiver he'll be in this offense. Are they going to use him as a gadget player? Are they going to use him in the slot? They're going to put him outside. He could be utilized in a couple of different ways. It'll be a lot on Kellen Moore to put him in a spot to be successful, and then ultimately for Dak Prescott to feel comfortable throwing him the football.
All right, let's get into the ground game here. So Ezekiel Elliott, he whoever he trains with does a great job of filming their workouts. So the last few off seasons, he's looked in tip-top shape. He's getting these really good workouts in. So it seems like Zeke's season is becoming an every offseason thing.
Yep.
But I mean, again, I'm buying it. I mean, I'm buying it. If he's healthy, if that offensive line is rejuvenated, and if Dak is threatening you, I mean, if defenses are going to try to play us cover two, we got to be running for 5 or 6 yards of carry. We have to. And that's what's going to force them into the box. It's like, pick your poison. And we have a possibility to have that offense. So do you believe this offseason is different than the past ones? Do you think like he ultimately is going to ball out this year?
It's interesting. You asked kind of a two-part question there. The first part is, do you think this offseason is different? Yes. I don't believe it's because of the second thing you said there. It's because he's going to ball out. I think it's because there's pressure on him more than ever because there's an out in his contract at the end of this year. The lack of production last year from a majority of the season standpoint, it was due to an injury. He had that torn pectoral, or not pectoral, but whatever it was in his knee that he sustained in week 4, and he played through it the rest of the campaign. So there's a pressure on Zeke to be better, to be leaner, to be quicker, because guess what? Tony Pollard is all of those things at the moment. And he showed that last year with the production and the big strike ability and the electricity that he brought to the offense. Zeke needs to find a way back to 2018, back to 2016, if you really want to even get to that point. And in talking to him, he knows this. He knows that there's a different kind of pressure on him and that everything this season isn't just going to be handed to him. So I think he is taking this offseason at a different perspective. He's looking at it differently instead of, hey, I'm not a guarantee. Instead, I'm a guy that's going to go in, work my ass off, and earn my spot again because Tony Pollard's doing that every single day. Now it's his turn to do it, and nothing's given to him this season, which is a good thing for Cowboys fans. Don't worry. It's not because he's not going to ball out or whatever. It's because he knows that there is pressure this season, and he's taking it differently than he had previously.
So I knew about the out in his contract, but I just didn't look at it in that perspective. So that is very interesting because that does make so much sense. He's fighting for a job. It's either going to be with Dallas or if they do, because I mean, look at they moved on from La'el Collins, like Amari Cooper. Like these are guys that still, regardless of what you think, they still have good football left.
Yep.
And he sees that they're doing it with the other guys, and he's not the quarterback. And running backs, barely make it to the next contract. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, statistically, he's at that point where you see running backs start to drop off. Like if you look at the stats over the last, 10, 15 years, you can see he's kind of at that age where they start dropping off. I think, last year he was kind of, it's quite funny because people love players who are warriors and they think that's great. But then I've noticed a lot of offseason talk this year about CMC and Saquon saying, oh, well, they're going to go back to how they were.
Yeah.
Because, they were injured last year. It was different. It's like, yeah, but here you've got Zeke, who was playing through injuries. And I can't remember what game it was, but the game that Pollard missed, or it might have been 2 games that Pollard missed. And Zeke was running and he just was not moving. It was like he was running on the spot. And you're just looking at the guy thinking he should not be out there. But the team went to him and said, you shouldn't be playing. And he said, well, I'm playing. So it's like, on one side, fans love that kind of concept, but then on the on the flip side, they're like, "We'll get rid of him because he's old and busted." So, I think it's going to be interesting because, in theory, he's going to be healthy, but then on the other side of it, he is reaching that kind of age. So, I think from his point of view, take the team out of it. I think he needs a good season so that he can make sure that he's got that pay coming in for the next couple of years. Because we've seen in the NFL how quickly running backs can go from stars on teams to out of the league. So I think really, for the team, we want him to do well. And then personally, I think it's got to be a huge year for him.
Yeah, and he kind of has taken it to heart a little bit. And I saw the comment that you flashed up there, Coach, about how Zeke does have heart. And I agree completely. I think he's one of the hardest working players in the offseason, year in and year out. He's a get in there. He is a work ethic type of guy. He's a leader in that locker room. And that's the thing that's different is it's not saying Amari Cooper wasn't that. They still moved on. If the production's not there and they're paying you a significant amount of money, this front office, no matter what your status is as a player in the NFL, they're going to move on from you if the production isn't necessarily there. And I agree with you. I think Amari Cooper's got good football left. I think La'el Collins has got good football left. I think Ezekiel Elliott does. Zeke just has to prove it's past this season. And it's something that this team can invest in moving forward and not necessarily take that money and spend it elsewhere.
Defense and running the football work so well together. I would love for Zeke to bounce back because you can tell, like the dude wants to win. He's not just out there, to play the game. Like you can tell he cares about winning. And that's why, I respect him and I love cheering for him. I love running backs. My son's name is Emmett. So, I love, him go win a Super Bowl and maybe we'll have an Ezekiel in our family, like 20 years from now. Who knows? You never know, man. Life's funny like that. It's a circle. All right, let's speak about Tony Pollard. I heard he's getting some reps at wide receiver. I don't know if that's because I'm sure, again, this is probably another thing you're sick of hearing about, but, I don't know if that's because there was a lack of wide receivers at camp. Like you said, James Washington's banged up. Tolbert was a little banged up until the last day. Michael Gallup's banged up. So are they just putting him in there right now because he can do it? Or do you think they're actually putting him in there because they want him to do it?
There's probably an element to that. But when we saw him in there, I mean, there were a lot of times where you would put him out wide, then you'd motion him back in behind the line of scrimmage. And so there were a couple snaps that he took from behind the line as well, out of the shotgun and stuff like that, as opposed to going out and being in the slot solely. So I think there is maybe hey, let's get him out there because we know he can do it. He'll get some practice out of this, and we're not taking reps away from some of these other high-end players that could necessarily use the reps. But also I think it's because he's going to be used in that role to a certain extent. Talk about overall some of these guys that are used in that gadget role. Deebo Samuel, Tony Pollard and Deebo Samuel aren't necessarily too far off in terms of size comparison between the two. It's kind of crazy. I was even looking at that a couple weeks ago. It's like, wow, they're only about 5 pounds apart. Now, Pollard could probably put on a couple more pounds if he's going to take some of those licks. But if you use him as a wide receiver, use him as a running back, even a couple times a game, it keeps a defense on their toes. So I think there is an element to that of trying to get your playmakers the football, whether it's as a return man, you saw that last year, whether it's out of the backfield, you saw that last year. Screenplay, of course, you've seen that a ton of times with Zeke and Pollard. utilized in this offense. So I think overall it's to get him the football and to do it in a couple different creative ways.
In Memphis, where he went to school, like if you watch any of their, college football, like their players, I feel like all their skill position guys play multiple positions. Running backs are going out, wide receivers are coming in playing running backs, wide receivers are coming in and playing quarterback. So, I think, it's something he's done. Like he didn't just come to the NFL and now he's being asked to step in at wide receiver. No, he's done it at the Senior Bowl. I believe he played some wide receiver too. Yep. So, he's got a history of doing this. So it's not just a gimmick. Like this guy, he knows what's expected of him when he goes out there. So, all right, let's move on to wide receivers, because I think one of the biggest questions, Tyler Smith, can he come in? Can he solidify this offensive line? Zeke, Dak, those are big questions. But this one, can CeeDee Lamb step up and take that wide receiver one position? Cooper's gone, Michael Gallup's hurt. CeeDee Lamb's got that 88. Like Jerry, put it on the young man. Can he step up? Can he be that guy?
I think he can. That's one of the biggest things, I think, with this offense moving into this year is he needs to take that next step, that next level. And there's certainly, there's a track record in the past that says that he can do so. Talk about a great rookie season. It wasn't a Jamar Chase rookie season, but he had a great rookie season. He comes out last year, has 1,100 yards. He has a ton of touchdowns. He's a featured part of this offense. He took that next step. Now it's time to take a Lamb leap. That's what you're looking for, is the Lamb leap. You got to take him to the next level. He's got to be up there in terms of the best wide receivers in the NFC East, because right now the NFC East got better from a passing game standpoint. Look at all the wide receivers that are in this division now with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Terry McLaurin. There are good receivers all over this division at the moment. He's got to be the best out of those guys. And there's definitely a way for him to do that, but he's got to be on the same page with Dak Prescott. He's got to limit the drops. He had 8 drops last year. You got to cut that down significantly. He had a higher drop rate out of guys that had 1,000 yards than anybody else in the NFL. That's something that he has to figure out, and he's got to kind of shore up to a certain extent in order to be really successful.
Man, his play at the end of that Patriots game, like that was huge. Like that game was such a wild ride. That game was a wild ride. Like that was one of the peaks for me during the season. But, you're talking about Dak. Can Dak sustain a monster receiver? Because Dak, we do see he does like to spread the ball around. He's going to take what's given to him. Can Kellen game plan, a guy who's going to get 8 to 10, targets a game, 8 to 12 targets a game? Do you think this is something the Cowboys are going to try to force?
Maybe early in the season, you might see a couple of force-fed things, but I don't think you can force-feed a number one wide receiver. You're either a number one or you're not.
Well, like Cooper Kupp, they're yeah. I know he's the dude's, and obviously it's, this is one instance, but yeah, there are guys like that, that are, they're getting their targets and they're finding a way. Jalen Waddle comes in Miami last year, and the dude, if you're playing fantasy football, so we're, we started as a fantasy football show, but obviously we're just football guys. But Jalen Waddle, if you look at his numbers, man, they're finding him ways to get the ball. But I don't know if our offense, I don't know if Kellen Moore is that type of offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think Kellen wants to find a way to kind of flip it around and be a gadget guy and kind of find a way to do things differently.
Yeah.
And that's the weird part about it. We always talk on our show on Talking Cowboys about the bag. He's reaching in his bag and he's trying to go deeper and deeper. Yeah. Well, at some point he looked in that bag and it was empty.
Yeah.
He wants to make sure that it's a little bit deeper this year than it was in years past. And I think CeeDee Lamb adds an element to that. I was trying to look up the specific stats, but DeAndre Hopkins in his first 2 years in the NFL with the Texans were almost identical in stats when he had Andre Johnson for his first 2 years as CeeDee Lamb's first 2 years when he had Amari Cooper. In year 3 of DeAndre Hopkins' career was the year that he finally took a next step and was certainly one of the top wide receivers in the NFL. That was without Andre Johnson in the fold. You're expecting something similar to that. Here, I've got the stats now. So Through his first 2 seasons in the NFL, he had 52 receptions and 76 receptions. That was for 802 yards and 1,200 yards, respectively. Very close to what CeeDee Lamb did specifically. Year 3, without Andre Johnson in the fold at 23 years old, the age that CeeDee Lamb is heading into the season, 111 receptions and 1,500 yards.
Gimme. I'll take that.
If CeeDee Lamb can do anything remotely close to that, it is a huge success for this offense. It means they utilized him in the right way, and it means you're successful because that's plenty of opportunity for Michael Gallup to get in the fold, Dalton Schultz to get in the fold, everybody else to contribute, but CeeDee Lamb's the one leading the way.
I'll take that in 17 games.
Exactly.
You know?
I think it's one of those things too. You look at it and you think, we are like, once again, we talked about it sort of earlier, like where we as fans get all the information we get now. Obviously, coaches are getting even more than that. They're getting so many statistics thrown at them. So it's that kind of thing that they're trying to get cleverer every day and smarter every day and outsmart the defense. But then at the end of the day, it is just nice to have those alpha guys who you just know, okay, we're going to do, to a certain extent, it was Tony Romo to Witten. You knew that we'd get to certain situations and that's what they were going to do. And then half the time the defense couldn't even stop it anyway. And I think, having an alpha, if Lamb can be that alpha, yes, it's nice to have all of, your bag of tricks and you want to sort of, be able to maybe get, a cheap 10 yards because the defense wasn't expecting it. But yeah, just to have that alpha that, when it's needed and stuff does break down, you've got that. Yep. It can make the difference between a decent playoff team and not even making the playoffs.
And that's what CeeDee Lamb has to become this season. I mean, he was drafted 10 spots ahead of DeAndre Hopkins in the NFL draft for a reason, to be a number 1 receiver. You don't use the 17th overall pick in the NFL draft in order to find a guy to throw the football to for 1,000 yards a season. He needs to be that guy, that cornerstone of your offense and somebody to throw the football to. And to this extent, his credit through the first 2 seasons, I finally found the specifics, but he had 16 more receptions than Hopkins did in his first 2 seasons. And he had over 25 yards more than Hopkins did in his first 2 seasons. He had 3 touchdowns more than Hopkins had in his first 2 seasons. So he's been great to this point as a number 2. Now it's his time to shine as a number 1. He's going to have to find that at least early in the season, because they're going to have to establish him without Michael Gallup.
So you mentioned drafting CeeDee Lamb at 17. What was your what did you have to do? You said if CeeDee Lamb somehow falls to Dallas at 17, can you quickly talk us through that real quick? I need to remember. I need to refresh it.
Yeah, I love talking about this. And it's funny because I ran 4 miles before I got here to the show. I got out of the shower and threw on a Cowboys shirt and a Cowboys hat. So back in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, we were taking questions for Twitter on the 20, and somebody asked, what about CeeDee Lamb? What is there a chance he falls to the Cowboys? I was so confident because he was my number 1 wide receiver that he wouldn't make it to 17. I said, if the Cowboys select CeeDee Lamb and pick number 17, I will run from my apartment to the Star and back, which is a full half marathon. It's a half marathon. It was 13.5 something miles there and back. And I don't know if you see me, I'm not the epitome of fitness.
You hit dingers though.
I'm a decently athletic guy who played baseball. That's the only reason I'm even able to do that. I played baseball, but I played baseball because I can't run. So, that's the issue. And so that was kind of an out of my ordinary thing. Well, within 20 minutes of that pick being made, I was excited. I was happy. I was toasting Miller Lights with Hellman on the virtual stream. And then all of a sudden I look at my phone and there's a Twitter notification. And it's oh, you better get your running shoes on. So I did it. I ran 13.5 miles. Only time I've ever had to do a half marathon. But, hey, I did it. I was totally banged up for the rest of the year. Put me on IR. My right knee wasn't necessarily right. But, hey, it was a ton of fun. And I would do it again. Honestly, if a player that talented fell again, sign me up. I'll run 15 miles. I'll do whatever I need to do to get to that point. It's just got to be the right player. I'm not just going to do it for anybody.
It's funny. I had the opposite scenario. I talked Micah Parsons to the Dallas Cowboys into existence a year and a half prior to us drafting. It's my buddy Shane Hallam from the Draft Network. He, big draft analyst, and I told him, like that, the Cotton Bowl film from Micah Parsons, I fell in love with him completely.
Yeah.
He was my number one player. You know, Micah Parsons at Dallas, and my buddy Shane was like, no way. They're going to be way too good to draft him. And then out the gate, you know, Dak gets hurt. I'm like, how about now? And then it got to a point where he was telling me we're going to be drafting too early to get him. But then, you know, I think Bucky Brooks was on the show. You know, there was some rumors about Parsons. He fell a little bit. But I kept saying it. I stuck to it. And that's my claim to fame. I talked Micah Parsons into existence. So you got some responsibility for the Lamb thing. I got the Parsons thing. So we could toast to that.
In reality, neither one of us ever did anything to influence either one of those picks, but we're going to take full credit for it either way.
Hell yeah, Shepstradamus. That was the birth of Shepstradamus right there. All right, let's move on to the tight end position because I saw my buddy Joe in here. We're big fans of Jake Ferguson. And nice. Joe had mentioned that we think that Jake Ferguson's going to take over the tight end position in a year. The guy who runs, I think it's Nagy, who runs the Senior Bowl, he said that Jake Ferguson, out of everybody who was there this year, he had the best hands out of everybody. That includes wide receivers, tight ends. So I know Schultz is on the franchise tag. You know, he sat out a few, then he came back, and I ultimately think the guy's going to play. Yeah. But do you think Jake Ferguson can legitimately eat into some of his snaps this year, and you know, or do you think like, you know, Schultz is the runaway clear cut number one guy with them?
Yeah, no, I completely agree that he could come in and certainly be a factor early on. You mentioned the Senior Bowl. I mean, that's where I started to really be impressed with Jake Ferguson. I mean, he was fierce as a blocker throughout all of those practices. He didn't back down from anybody, though he might have not been the most well-built tight end out of anybody in the group. He was certainly one that was competing with the Trey McBrides and with the guys that were in attendance there, the Bellingers from San Diego State. I mean, every tight end that was at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, I mean, there was no separation in terms of the guys where Jake Ferguson was there specifically. So I really do like him as an added product. But, I mean, the biggest thing for him is he's a little bit undersized, 6'5", 245. It doesn't seem like he's undersized, but I think the 245 may be a little bit generous. That might have been his weight at some other point along the way. He's definitely not 245 now. He needs to bulk up a little bit, and I think he's somebody that could really be a receiving threat at some point, but that's really not what you need him to do. You need him to be a blocker, and that's what he's going to be called upon doing early on, because Dalton Schultz is really your receiving threat at least in terms of 2022, but don't rule out Jake Ferguson being that in the future as well.
You're on mute, mate.
Sorry about that. He's got to know that, you know, that's kind of the knock that Dalton Schultz has, is that he can't necessarily block. So if he's young and smart as well, he's talented, he'll know that's what he's got to work on, because he can already catch the football. You know, he can already run down the seam, but if he can get an edge on the blocking, because we got, Jeremy Sprinkle, and we know Jeremy Sprinkle, he could block, but he's not really necessarily doing it. I mean, at Arkansas, he was pretty good, and I remember talking about him coming out, but he really hasn't done it. And I know he was with Washington for a while. But, you know, he's got to know that's his ticket. If he can block, he can get on the field. And if you're willing to block and you're willing to hit the weights, you know, look what happened with Steele. Coaches love him. You know, you could be just like that.
And the thing about tight ends is it's when you actually look at the stats for tight ends in their rookie year, like, it's amazing. I think, you know, it was one of those things looking back at Pitts this year, and it was sort of one of those things of, you know, Pitts ends up hitting his 1,000 yards, but really, you know, doesn't do anything as far as touchdowns are concerned. Yep. But then you look at it historically and what he's done, you know, I think Schultz is going to have to be a massive part of this year. And then, like, it sort of becomes a question of, okay, you know, 12 months, we see all the time these NFL guys who, after being in the system for 12 months, come back in the second year and you're thinking, hang on, that's a different guy, because they've chucked on so many pounds of muscle. So I think really that's kind of
DeMarcus Ware. DeMarcus Ware, when he came back year 1 to year 2, it was he looked like he ate himself.
Yeah, so, like, I think that's what will be really sort of, like, it'll be interesting to see, because, I mean, the Cowboys back in the Garrett days were trying to always get two tight ends working, and it just never seemed to happen. You know, we just every couple of years, we'll chuck a second-round pick at a tight end, and then
Gavin Escobar.
Yeah, and Fasano. Didn't they both go to Miami at one point?
I think so.
But, like, I think Ferguson will be, like, the next year will be the question for me, whether or not he, you know, like, do we look at the end of the year and say Schultz is gone, or are they going to sign Schultz long term and then they've got two options at tight end?
Well, you think about it too. I mean, Dalton Schultz was a 4th-round pick as well, 137th overall. And then you've got Jake Ferguson, who was a 4th-round pick overall and is going into his rookie season at 129. So, I mean, they were right around that same area of the draft that they were selected in. Dalton Schultz didn't make an impact until 2020. I mean, there was 2 seasons there where you were thinking, all right, when's he going to show up? Are we going to cut this guy? That was the conversation we had on a show prior to training camp in 2020 was, are we even going to have Dalton Schultz on the roster heading into camp? And now he's a franchise tag player. So it takes some time to develop these guys. They're not going to come in and set the world on fire. I know Dallas has been seemingly spoiled in that regard for first-round picks over the last couple of years. I mean, look at CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons. I mean, as rookies, they've both been great. And I mean, Micah Parsons having one of the best rookie seasons in the history of the NFL. If you're expecting that out of a 4th-round tight end, it's not necessarily going to happen. Now, Jalen Tolbert might have an opportunity to come in and play well because he's going to be thrust into the fire as an early season rookie, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something to keep an eye on for him early in the season. He's going from playing Troy and playing Coastal Carolina to going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, he had his best games, though, against Tennessee and Alabama.
He did. He certainly did, and I completely agree with that. I think Tolbert's going to be great when he gets kind of his feet settled in and he gets some game action. I think he's going to tear the preseason up, in my own opinion. But you're already relying so much on a 4th-round tight end to come in and play significant snaps and come in and be a blocker and be a mauler. It may take a little bit of a dialing back early on because he's going to take some time to develop. But I think ultimately that's what the plan is for Jake Ferguson. It's what he does at the end of the year, not what he's doing week 1 and week 2.
All right, I want to get into – I'm sorry. Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, like it's sort of all sort of combines into one for me. Like that's probably been my biggest concern about the offseason is like, okay, moving on from Amari. Okay, I didn't sort of like moving on from Amari, but okay, I get it. Yeah. Moving on from Lyle Collins, I didn't sort of like understand. I get it. I mean, because if they were going to get rid of them and get someone in, then yep, okay, no worries. You're moving the money around. But it was almost like we were sort of like wanting to put the money into a rainy day fund or something, which obviously doesn't really work in the NFL. So we go from this point where last year we had this situation where I think to a certain extent we overachieved, but then to a certain extent we underachieved. Like we struggled out of the gate in so many games, but then once we're actually up and rolling, you thought, geez, this team could do something. And then all of a sudden we've just decided that we're going to get rid of a few guys. And then all of a sudden the draft picks are going to come in and they're going to take us and they're going to assist with the leap. Like you sort of look at it and you think we've sort of got those guys like Prescott and Zeke who are at a level, you know, can they go slightly higher or slightly lower? Yes, sure. But they're sort of at that level. And then to me, the concern is we've got rid of a few sort of veterans and then we sort of end up just deciding we're going to replace them with draft picks. And as you said, we've got lucky in the draft, if anything else, over the last few years.
I wouldn't say
these guys have come in and done well. And now all of a sudden it's sort of like we've decided that's the norm, not the exception, which is really sort of like, it's been, I can't remember an off-season like this where it's sort of like, oh, no, we're not going to really do anything. We're just going to sit and wait for the season to start. It's been quite bizarre.
Yeah, it's interesting because the best way to describe it is it's not a rebuild, but it's like a renovation. It's a restructuring because like you said, you still have your core members of your team with the exception of Amari Cooper. Even the Lyle Collins departure, that's not going to kill you. You didn't necessarily play with him last year really at all anyways. So really Amari Cooper is the number one exception to the restructured deal. And then you bring in a James Washington, you draft a Jalen Tolbert. You hope those two guys together can maybe fill the back end of your depth chart, and CeeDee Lamb takes that step up, and he's the one that's ultimately replacing the production of Amari Cooper. But the biggest change this offseason is something that I know Coach mentioned earlier in the show, and that was the fact that this is a tougher team. They're not going to go out and get bullied like they did in the wild card game. They're not going to go out and get smacked in the mouth like they did in the Denver game, at least on paper. Anything can happen when the season rolls around, and you can maybe tuck your tail and run just as much as you did in 2021. Who knows? That's why you play the game. But there was a considerable effort this offseason to bring in tough, hard-nosed, hard-working, head-on straight guys that are going to contribute to the cause and not subtract from the cause. That was the biggest thing. They want guys to come in here. They want them to compete for jobs. They want them to compete for playing time. They want these guys to continue to show that toughness. So that way, when San Francisco comes into your house at AT&T Stadium and they've got the boom box and they're rolling out to the field, you're not intimidated by the moment, because that's just show. You're about to put it on the field this year.
Right.
And I think that's really been the biggest considerable effort in terms of the restructure of this team heading into 2022. It's been a mentality standpoint, not necessarily an on-paper talent standpoint.
Man, when you guys were both talking about the changes, like you said, so the biggest thing for me is an attitude adjustment. That's what I would call it. It was an attitude adjustment this offseason. Speaking of attitude, like you're saying, like it's about wanting to win, but it's also about wanting to be respected. Like there's guys, when you play at a certain level, like you look at Micah Parsons, like he came out as a rookie and that dude wants to be respected. Like, you are going to respect me. He's not going to ask for it. He's going to take it. And that's above just win-loss. That's about, we're going to play football. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to beat the brakes off you. And when we leave the field, you're going to know what you're going to get next time you see me. And wins and losses will sort themselves out. And I think they're trying to bring those guys in, because when you have a bunch of those guys, people don't want to play you. People get sick and tired of playing you because it is a dogfight. And hopefully there's a dogfight between these two players. And this dogfight hopefully is going to happen at the quarterback. Hopefully the quarterback's the bone, because I'm hearing Tank Lawrence saying Micah Parsons, he ain't gonna have more sacks than him this season. And then Parsons, on the other hand, is saying, well, watch me. If you have 15, I'm gonna have 20. Yeah. So how do you see this? This is obviously a good thing for the team. I think this is a great thing for the team. And like with Zeke, he's being pushed a little bit because he sees the out at the end of his contract. Maybe Tank is being pushed a little bit because he's seen he's not the alpha anymore. And he's got to earn that alpha role. So how do you see that playing out between them two?
No, I think if you're going to be impressed by a unit of this team early on, it's going to be the defensive line. And I think it starts with Micah Parsons. I think it starts with DeMarcus Lawrence. And those two guys competing with each other. There's an element there that hasn't been there in the past that I think will be really exciting for Cowboys fans. And D-Law has taken it to heart. I've actually gotten to spend a lot of time with D-Law throughout the summer and having these conversations with him. I mean, he says that he's leaner, he's quicker. He's one guy he's even a little smaller than he has been, but in a good way. I mean, he's expecting to be a speed guy off the edge and be able to finish the way that he hasn't necessarily done over these last couple of years, because he's tired of talking about pressures. He doesn't want pressures. He wants sacks, and he wants to be the big man on campus again. And I think he's taken steps to get to that point as well. But going back to what you were saying initially with the respect factor, I mean, early in the show, I brought up Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers, and everybody kind of stepped back and was like, oh, Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers, we're talking about the Cowboys. They're on a different level. That's what Micah wants to be. He wants to be Aaron Donald. He wants to be TJ Watt. He wants to be like, oh, when we talk about these guys, we're not just talking about another good player in the NFL that had a flash in the pan. We're talking about an all-time great. That's where he's at from a mindset standpoint, because he knows that while this star on the helmet may help you in a business standpoint, it doesn't win you football games just from being on the field. Like, you've got to earn that star. You got to earn the wins that come along with it and the reputation that's there as well. And I think it's something that back and forth with Tank Lawrence is going to really help this defense out. And I'll even throw Sam Williams into the fold, just in interacting with all those guys together. He's kind of that third guy that may come in and surprise some people even as a rookie, because he's ready. I think he's going to have a pretty solid rookie season. Even if he comes out, he has 4 or 5 sacks. Like, that's a good rookie year for an edge rusher that you took in the second round. But I think he's somebody that fits that room almost perfectly, and somebody who I think that could be under the radar early on this season.
Well, that leads to my last question. All right. So, I mean, I could honestly, this has been phenomenal. I could go on for hours, talk. I feel like we barely touched on Tolbert. Cole
Yeah.
Beasley is a free agent. I didn't even bring that up. I don't know if he's coming back, but I'd love to have Bees back in Dallas. Marquise Bell is a guy I really liked. I thought if they let Jaron Kearse go, Marquise Bell is a clone. You watch his film, the dude just always around the football, knows for the football. We got, Garibay, I'm interested in a Texas Tech. So there's so many things, we don't have, all the time in the world to talk about this. But luckily, all of this stuff we do get to see play out in the next few weeks. But there is one final question I want to talk about. We lock up Jaron Kearse, right? Mm-hmm. We bring back Leighton Vander Esch for a year. We add Dante Fowler. We draft Sam Williams. So there's 4 players I just listed right there. Kearse, Vander Esch, Fowler, Williams. Of those 4 players, which one of them do you think steps up? I guess not necessarily the third guy, because we also got to list Diggs, and that's another guy Diggs had probably one of the most remarkable seasons out of a cornerback. And man, is he a hot rod talking point. People love to either bash him so I haven't even brought him up. You know what I mean? But I guess we took that for granted, or at least maybe I took that for granted. But of those 4 players, who could step up and be the next man up? Who do you think?
So you're saying excluding Diggs,
because Diggs is already. Okay. We got Diggs, we got Tank, we got Parsons, we got the 3 alphas out there. Which of those 4 could possibly step up and be the 4th guy?
I've really liked the way Leighton Vander Esch has looked in practices so far. He looks quick. He's been in the right spot at the right time. Played all 17 games last year. So if you're wondering about the health, hopefully, if you really want to go diving into it, he's healthy as he's ever been in the NFL heading into this season. He could be en route to having a really nice campaign. But I'm going to say Jaron Kearse. I really do like the way that Kearse could continue. And honestly, if he does what he does last year, this year, he's a Pro Bowler. Easy money. He would even be considered all pro, in my opinion. Maybe he gets another pick or 2 that add to that total as he did last year, but he was such a blessing for that defense a year ago in a spot that the Cowboys haven't necessarily had a fruitful amount of throughout the last decade, 2 decades, really, at safety. They've been dry at that position, and Jaron Kearse not only comes in and fills that spot, but he fills kind of that third linebacker role as well with Micah and with Leighton Vander Esch. So I'll put Jaron Kearse in there as well, especially with Dan Quinn being back in the fold. I think that's a no-brainer. I think he'll be in a great spot to have a solid second year in a row. But let me put Leighton Vander Esch at a close second place to Kearse, because I think LVE is going to surprise some people. He may be looking like he did his rookie year just based off of the health alone, and because he's been able to kind of put that behind him, and now he's got a chance to prove himself in a contract year.
Man, the way he played against the Saints rookie season, I remember that game just being like he was out of his mind. Even Jalen had a great game against the Saints too. I remember him just dropping Alvin Kamara like a bad habit. But it makes me happy because you obviously being there, you get to see these players. So if you're seeing Vander Esch and you're seeing something you like, that makes me happy. But Jaron Kearse, that was like one of the first signings this offseason where you could tell they're pushing for that attitude adjustment. Yep. He plays with an edge. He wants the challenge. He wants to be challenged, and he wants to face the best. And you can tell he's not just saying that, because some people say that and then they run from it. No, he wants to lock these guys up. He wants to see Kittle. He wants to see Kelsey. He wants to see Andrews. He wants to see the top tight ends, and I love that, man. So, man, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on this evening, Campey. Before we wrap this thing up, man, do you have anything you'd like to put out there? Any more questions you'd like to ask?
No, well, I heard you guys talking about it before I jumped on, but congratulations to Kyle on his very, very exciting offseason.
Yeah.
So for those who aren't Cowboys fans, he had an engagement, and I must say, did you speak to people at work to try and say, hey, look, this has got to look really, professional? Because the quality on the whole thing was quite amazing to me. It was almost like a motion picture.
Yeah, actually, I did. I went and grabbed a couple of coworkers of mine that work in our sponsorship and video department, and was like, "Hey, I'm going to propose downtown. I kind of need you for like a couple hours. I'll buy you dinner. Let me pay you for it. like, what can you do? And they absolutely knocked it out of the park. Shout out to my guy Connor down in the video department. They do such good work, and I that's the reason I called upon them. I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it right, and I want to make sure that they capture the moment. But that's what they're used to doing, is capture the moment. And so they did a great job. The pictures turned out great. The video was fantastic as well. And we're excited to get married, man. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. She's a big Cowboys fan too, and she actually used to work in the event presentation side. So we've got some Cowboys spin coming on it, and we got to host an event together or a couple weeks ago, and so it's been a blast, and we're truly blessed to be where we are in this offseason.
Hell yeah, man. Well, good luck with all that stuff. It seems like you guys are going to be A-okay with all the planning, but I do want to let everybody know, however you're listening, it'd be greatly appreciated. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the like button, throw us some comments. We're on Apple Podcasts. You can find Campey down under. He is at Andrew Campey on the Twitter. I am at Coach Sheps. Kyle over here is at Kyle_Youmans. That's Youmans. And you definitely want to follow Talking Cowboys. You want to follow the draft show. Hopefully this year, like last year, we're not talking draft show until
February.
Yes. Let's get a Super Bowl, huh? Let's talk that. How about this? I'll say this here. I'll run a half marathon if the Cowboys play in a Super Bowl. So if we get to a Super Bowl this year, I will run a half marathon, even if I have to crawl across the finish line. So
I'll run it with you. How about that? If they win it, I'll run it with you. So
okay.
we'll run it together.
So I'll be holding extra hope so we can virtually. we'll do it virtually together. All right, man. It has been a pleasure having you on. Everybody listening, we appreciate that. Good luck. Go Cowboys. Have a great offseason. And we'll be watching some Cowboys practices, some news reports coming up in the next few weeks here in July. All right, take care.